Brenda stood with her hands on her hips, a scowl deepening the lines around her mouth, her gaze like a drill aimed squarely at Sarah. The late afternoon sun glinted off the perfectly manicured lawn, highlighting every blade of grass that Brenda probably measured with a ruler. "Look, I've told you before, young lady," Brenda began, her voice a low rumble that tried to sound calm but vibrated with barely contained fury. "This isn't some free-for-all. This is Harmony Creek. We have standards. High standards. And your things are simply not acceptable." Sarah, leaning against the polished fender of her dark, unassuming sedan, didn't flinch. Her expression remained serene, a small, almost invisible smile playing on her lips. She slowly pushed herself upright, her posture effortlessly straight, radiating an aura of quiet power. The kind of power that made even Brenda, known for her iron will and sharp tongue, pause for a split second. "Brenda," Sarah said, her voice soft but clear, like the chime of a distant bell, "I understand you have your role. And I respect rules, believe me. I follow a lot of rules in my line of work. But I also know when someone is overstepping. And I definitely know when someone is trying to, shall we say, coerce a situation." Brenda scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "Coerce? Don't be ridiculous. I'm simply stating the facts. You're violating Section 4B, Subsection 7, Paragraph C of the Community Guidelines regarding." But Sarah didn't let her finish. She just tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing, and whispered, "You know, it's funny. Just yesterday, my team was going over the protocols for dealing with uncooperative individuals in sensitive situations. The kind where people mistake politeness for weakness." Sarah paused, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. "And let me tell you, Brenda, you wouldn't believe the resources we have at our disposal to ensure compliance. It's truly eye-opening how quickly things can change when the right people get involved." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Brenda's face, a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of doubt. Her mouth, which had been open to retort, snapped shut. Sarah simply smiled, a genuine, warm smile that somehow felt colder than any glare. She pushed off the car fully, her hand instinctively going to the small of her back, a subtle movement that only someone familiar with carrying a specific kind of weight might make. Brenda's eyes followed the movement, and for the first time, a genuine tremor of uncertainty ran through her. What was this young woman talking about? And why did that smile feel so knowing? Just 8 months earlier, the Miller family, David, a kind-hearted architect with a penchant for classic rock, Linda, a warm and artistic ceramicist, and their bright, independent daughter, Sarah, had packed up their lives in the bustling city. They longed for a quieter existence, a place where the air was cleaner, the nights were darker, and the sense of community felt real, not just a distant dream. Harmony Creek, with its tree-lined streets, perfectly manicured lawns, and cheerfully painted houses, seemed like the answer to all their prayers. David had found the listing online, captivated by the promise of serene living in top-rated schools, even though Sarah was already grown and carving out her own path in a way they were incredibly proud of. Linda had fallen in love with the spacious backyard, imagining her pottery wheel nestled under the shade of an old oak tree, turning clay into beautiful art. Sarah, always supportive of her parents' dreams, had helped them sort through boxes, reminding them to keep only what sparked joy, a phrase that had become a family mantra. They had purchased a charming, 2-story house with a welcoming front porch and a vibrant red door, a distinct splash of color in a neighborhood of muted tones. The first few weeks in Harmony Creek were everything they had hoped for. Neighbors waved from their porches, children rode bikes safely down the streets, and the evenings were filled with the soft chirping of crickets rather than the blare of city sirens. David spent hours meticulously planting a small herb garden, while Linda transformed a corner of the garage into her new pottery studio, already sketching designs inspired by the gentle flow of the nearby creek. Sarah, who visited on weekends, loved the peace and quiet, a stark contrast to her demanding work week, which she always vaguely described as problem-solving and ensuring national safety. They didn't push for more details. They knew their daughter was doing important things, and they trusted her completely. One sunny Saturday, as David was carefully pruning a rose bush by the mailbox, a woman approached, her gait precise and her expression serious. She was impeccably dressed, even for a casual stroll, with not a single hair out of place in her perfectly coiffed blonde bob. This was Brenda, the president of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, HOA. "Welcome to Harmony Creek, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice crisp and formal, though she offered a polite, if somewhat stiff, smile. "I'm Brenda, the HOA president. I just wanted to introduce myself and welcome you properly. I understand you've just moved into 14 Elmwood Lane." David straightened up, wiping his gloved hands on his pants. "Oh, thank you, Brenda. It's so lovely to meet you. David Miller, and this is our home. We're truly enjoying it here. Such a peaceful place." "Indeed," Brenda replied, her eyes scanning his rose bush, then traveling up to the red door. "We pride ourselves on maintaining that peace, and the aesthetic integrity of our community. I've left a welcome packet for you on your porch with all the essential guidelines and bylaws. I'm sure you'll find them quite thorough." She paused, her gaze lingering on the red door for a moment too long. "Our community values uniformity, you see. It contributes to the property values and overall harmony." David nodded, not quite catching the subtle hint about the door. "Absolutely. We appreciate that. We've always been keen on keeping a nice home." Brenda smiled again, a thin, almost practiced smile. "Excellent. Well, do let me know if you have any questions. Though, the packet is quite comprehensive. It covers everything from acceptable fence heights to mailbox designs. We even have a strict policy on lawn ornaments. Only approved, small, natural-toned pieces are permitted, for instance." She rattled off a few more rules, none of which seemed particularly alarming at the time, though David did notice her eyes darting around his front yard with an almost clinical precision. He thought she was just being helpful, ensuring they understood the expectations of living in such a well-kept neighborhood. He thanked her warmly, and Brenda, with a final, pointed look at the red door, departed. Later that evening, David and Linda sat on their newly acquired porch swing, sipping iced tea and flipping through the HOA welcome packet. It was indeed comprehensive. Page after page of rules, regulations, and guidelines, covering everything from the precise shade of exterior paint allowed, a limited palette of neutrals, to the type of flowers permitted in flowerbeds, no invasive species, only native varieties. There were rules about trash can placement, holiday decorations, only for a limited time, and even the hours when loud activities were prohibited. "Wow," Linda mused, a slight frown creasing her brow as she read about a mandatory annual power washing schedule. "They really do mean business, don't they? It's a bit intense for a residential neighborhood." "Well, I suppose it keeps the place looking nice," David countered, ever the optimist. "And it probably protects our property values. We did want a well-maintained community, after all." They chuckled about some of the more peculiar rules, like the one dictating that garage doors must remain closed at all times except when entering or exiting. They decided to take it all in stride, assuming most of the rules were common sense and that the HOA was just a little overly organized. They signed the acknowledgement form, promising to adhere to the bylaws, and mailed it back. A few weeks later, the first hint of trouble arrived. It wasn't a direct confrontation, but a formal letter in an official-looking HOA envelope. It was addressed to Resident, 14 Elmwood Lane, and stated, in polite but firm language, that their newly planted mailbox flowers, a cheerful mix of purple petunias and yellow marigolds, were in violation of Section 6, Subsection 3, Paragraph A, approved landscaping and permitted plant species. The letter explained that petunias, while beautiful, were not among the approved native species for roadside plantings and requested their immediate removal and replacement with compliant flora. It also included a helpful list of approved plant nurseries. David stared at the letter, then at his vibrant flowers, then back at the letter. "Are you serious?" he muttered, showing it to Linda. "Petunias? They're lovely. And marigolds are practically a national flower." Linda sighed. "It's a bit much, isn't it? Who polices petunias?" They debated what to do. David wanted to write a polite but firm letter back, arguing for horticultural common sense. Linda, however, suggested they just replace them. "It's not worth the hassle, honey," she advised. "We just moved here. Let's not start a war over flowers." Reluctantly, David agreed. He grumbled, but he dug up the offending petunias and replaced them with some rather dull, but HOA-approved, creeping thyme. The marigolds, thankfully, passed inspection. This small incident was a low point, a minor irritation that chipped away at the initial bliss of Harmony Creek. It was the first sign that beneath the veneer of perfect lawns and friendly waves, there was a rigid structure, a watchful eye, and an uncompromising enforcer in Brenda. Life settled into a new rhythm. David found a local architecture firm, and Linda's pottery classes filled up quickly. Sarah continued her demanding job, commuting every weekend to see them. Harmony Creek was mostly peaceful, but Brenda's presence was always there, a low hum of potential oversight. They'd occasionally see her on her meticulous walks, clipboard in hand, sometimes stopping to chat with neighbors, sometimes just observing. Her observations often seemed to result in more official-looking envelopes appearing in mailboxes. Then came the incident with the gnome. Linda, missing a touch of whimsy in their perfectly regulated yard, had bought a small, tasteful garden gnome named Norman at a local craft fair. He was only about a foot tall, painted in gentle earth tones, and she placed him discreetly among the bushes near their porch. He made her smile. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one was even more specific. Violation notice, unauthorized garden ornamentation, Section 4, Subsection 2, Paragraph B. It cited Norman specifically, stating that whimsical garden statuary not in keeping with the natural aesthetic of Harmony Creek is strictly prohibited. The letter included a photograph of Norman, taken from the street, indicating how closely they were being monitored. This time, the request was not just for removal, but also a warning of a potential fine if not rectified within 48 hours. Linda was furious. "A gnome? Really? Norman is barely visible. This is absurd." David, however, was starting to get a bit tired of fighting small battles. "Look, honey," he said, sighing. "It's just a gnome. We knew this place had strict rules. Let's just put him in the backyard." Linda, though deeply annoyed, knew he was right. They moved Norman to a cozy spot by Linda's studio window, where he could still watch over her work. But the incident left a bitter taste. It felt less like maintaining community standards and more like an exercise in control. They started to realize that Brenda wasn't just organized, she was obsessive, a relentless arbiter of conformity. The small infringements continued. A complaint about their recycling bin being left out too long on collection day, they were 20 minutes late bringing it in, a note about David's classic car being parked on the street for a few hours while he cleaned the garage. Apparently, vehicles were only allowed on driveways unless actively loading/unloading. And even a polite inquiry about the faint scent of charcoal from their backyard grill on a weeknight. Noise and smoke ordinances were strictly enforced. Each time, the Millers complied, but each compliance chipped away at their sense of freedom and belonging. They were beginning to feel like they were living under a microscope, constantly aware of the watchful eyes of the HOA, or rather, Brenda. The final straw, the extreme event that shattered their tolerance, happened on a Saturday afternoon when Sarah was visiting. She had spent the morning helping Linda organize her pottery studio, and now, needing a break, she had decided to take a leisurely walk around the block, enjoying the sunny weather. She was wearing comfortable workout clothes and headphones, listening to a podcast about, ironically, organizational psychology. As she rounded the corner onto Elmwood Lane, she saw Brenda standing in her front yard, clipboard in hand, engaged in an animated conversation with one of their new neighbors, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who always seemed a little nervous around Brenda. Sarah nodded politely as she passed, and Brenda offered a curt nod back, her eyes quickly scanning Sarah's attire. Sarah continued her walk, enjoying the quiet. But as she approached her parents' house, she saw Brenda marching purposefully towards their property. She paused, pulling out her headphones, a faint sense of unease stirring within her. Brenda stopped dead in front of the Miller's house, not on the sidewalk, but a full step onto their lawn, violating the unspoken boundary of personal space. Her face was flushed, and her eyes, usually sharp, were now narrowed into angry slits. She held her clipboard like a weapon, pointing a manicured finger at the red front door. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller." Brenda's voice was shrill, cutting through the peaceful afternoon air. "I've tried to be patient. I've sent letters. I've made polite suggestions. But this is an outrage." David and Linda, who had been enjoying a quiet moment on their porch, looked up, startled. Sarah hurried forward, concern etching her face. "Brenda, what is it?" Linda asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. "What is it?" Brenda shrieked, gesturing wildly at the door. "It's the door. The red door. I specifically mentioned the community's aesthetic integrity. We have a limited palette of approved exterior colors, and fire engine red is not among them. It's an eyesore. A blight on the neighborhood. And I've received no less than 3 complaints about it." David stood up, his face reddening. "Brenda, with all due respect, we love our red door. It's welcoming. It's a classic color. And frankly, I don't recall seeing any specific rule about door colors in the bylaws. It falls under general aesthetic guidelines." Brenda retorted, her voice rising in pitch. "And furthermore, I tried to subtly hint at it when you first moved in. Your choice is a blatant disregard for the harmony of Harmony Creek. You will have it repainted by the end of the week, or face a significant daily fine." Her eyes flashed, full of a self-righteous fury. "Do you understand, Mr. Miller? This community will not tolerate such eccentricity." Sarah, who had been watching silently, stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Brenda's agitated state. Her presence seemed to momentarily freeze the argument. Brenda turned her ire towards Sarah, misinterpreting her quiet confidence as defiance. "And you?" Brenda snapped, her gaze hardening as she looked at Sarah. "You seem to think you can just waltz in here, bringing your urban attitudes into our quiet community. You're just as bad as your parents, with your disregard for established rules and proper decorum. Perhaps you should learn to mind your own business and let adults handle community affairs." Her voice was dripping with condescension, her attempt to intimidate Sarah clear and unapologetic. "Perhaps you need a lesson in respect." Sarah's eyes, usually warm and observant, hardened imperceptibly. A very faint, almost imperceptible flicker of something sharp, a spark of something dangerous, crossed her features. She took a slow, deliberate step towards Brenda, her calm composure somehow more menacing than any outburst. Brenda, sensing a shift she didn't understand, took a small, involuntary step back. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity, the peaceful afternoon shattered by Brenda's outburst and the unexpected, unnerving stillness of Sarah. Brenda, fueled by her own self-importance, didn't seem to notice the shift in Sarah. Her voice, still sharp, continued its assault. "Yes, respect. This is a community built on order, not individual whims. Your parents should have taught you better. Some people just don't understand how things work in a proper neighborhood. They think they can just roll in and do whatever they please. Her eyes narrowed at Sarah's casual clothes. And quite frankly, your appearance is hardly appropriate for a Saturday afternoon stroll. We have standards here, young lady. Sarah's silence was heavy, a profound calm that seemed to absorb Brenda's bluster rather than reflect it. David and Linda watched, a knot of dread tightening in their stomachs. They had never seen their daughter quite like this, not angry, not upset, but incredibly still, like a deep body of water before a storm. Sarah simply stood there, her gaze unwavering, observing Brenda with an almost clinical detachment. "You know," Sarah finally said, her voice still quiet, but with an underlying current that was undeniably firm, "I deal with people who think they can do whatever they please, quite often. It's actually a significant part of my job. And what I've learned is that genuine respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And intimidation? That usually backfires, especially when directed at someone who understands how to navigate very complex systems." She took another slow step forward, her hand moving, almost imperceptibly, to the pocket of her shorts, not quite reaching for anything, but the gesture itself was enough to make Brenda's eyes dart towards it. Brenda, unnerved by Sarah's unshakable calm and cryptic words, sputtered. "What are you talking about? Complex systems? This is Harmony Creek. We have bylaws." She tried to regain her bluster, puffing out her chest. "And I enforce them for the good of everyone." "For the good of everyone, or for your own sense of control?" Sarah countered, her voice still low, but slicing through Brenda's bravado like a sharp knife. "There's a big difference, Brenda. True community spirit comes from kindness and understanding, not from petty rules and threats. And frankly, trying to bully my parents, or anyone, over the color of a door or a garden gnome, is not building community. It's creating animosity." Brenda's face flushed a deeper red. She opened her mouth to retort, but Sarah continued, her voice gaining a quiet authority that commanded attention. "And just so we're clear, my appearance, my parents' door, or anything else about our lives, is our business. If you have a legitimate concern, you can address it politely. But if you think you can stomp onto our property and try to dictate our lives with threats, you are making a grave error. Because some of us," Sarah concluded, her gaze unwavering, "are not as easily intimidated as you might think. Some of us know exactly how to deal with uncooperative individuals who believe they are above the law." Sarah's final words hung in the air, weighted with an unspoken implication. Brenda's mouth was still open, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from Sarah's calm, knowing face to the subtle, almost imperceptible way Sarah held herself, radiating an undeniable power. A strange fear, cold and unfamiliar, began to prickle at Brenda's skin. She suddenly felt very small, very exposed, and utterly outmatched. She had faced down countless residents, but this young woman was different. There was something in her eyes, a deep understanding of power dynamics that Brenda had never encountered before. Brenda finally managed to close her mouth, swallowing hard. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched away, her furious strides lacking their usual confident precision. She didn't look back. David and Linda stared after her, then at Sarah, their faces a mixture of shock and profound relief. "Sarah," Linda breathed, What was that?" Sarah just offered a small, reassuring smile. "Just a little lesson in boundaries, Mom. Some people need a very clear line drawn for them." She didn't elaborate, but the quiet strength in her voice was enough. The tension in the Miller household began to slowly dissipate after Brenda's abrupt retreat. David and Linda exchanged bewildered glances, still reeling from the confrontation and Sarah's surprising handling of it. They knew their daughter was smart, resourceful, and incredibly capable, but they had never seen her wield such quiet, unshakable authority. It was a new side to her, a side that hinted at the serious nature of her problem-solving job. They decided not to press her for details, trusting that she had handled it appropriately and that, for now, Brenda would likely keep her distance. The red door, however, remained a vibrant beacon of their individuality. Life in Harmony Creek resumed its carefully orchestrated calm, but with a new undercurrent. Brenda's usual confident strides around the neighborhood seemed a little less bold, her clipboard less frequently brandished. She still walked, she still observed, but her interactions with the Millers became conspicuously absent. She would actively avert her gaze when passing their house, or suddenly find something fascinating to inspect on the other side of the street. It was a small victory, but a noticeable one, and the Millers breathed a quiet sigh of relief. They tried to re-engage with the positive aspects of their community. David rediscovered the joy of working in his new home office, designing beautiful, functional spaces for clients. Linda's pottery studio became her sanctuary, filled with the earthy scent of clay and the rhythmic whir of her wheel. Sarah continued her weekend visits, bringing stories from her demanding work and a comforting presence to their home. They hosted small gatherings with new, friendlier neighbors, sharing laughter and garden tips, carefully avoiding any mention of HOA politics. The Millers wanted to believe that the worst was behind them, that Brenda had received her lesson and would simply leave them alone. However, true to her nature, Brenda's need for control was a deep-seated part of her personality. Her retreat was merely a strategic pause, not a surrender. She was meticulous, patient, and deeply resentful of anyone who dared to defy her perceived authority. She didn't forget the red door, or Sarah's unsettling composure. She merely shifted her tactics, seeking new avenues to exert her influence, no longer directly, but through more insidious means. The first subtle signs of her renewed campaign were almost imperceptible. David started noticing small, trivial things. A slightly higher than usual water bill, even though their usage hadn't changed. Then, a few days later, a flyer from a pest control company, unsolicited, was left precisely on their doormat, despite them having no pest issues. It seemed odd, a little too coincidental. Linda, too, experienced minor annoyances. She noticed a sudden, persistent hum in the electrical wiring of her studio, just enough to be distracting, but not enough to suggest a major problem. It was intermittent, making it difficult to pinpoint. She also received an anonymous tip, slipped under her studio door, warning her that her kiln, a perfectly safe and modern electric model, was a fire hazard and not up to community standards. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was distinctly elegant, almost calligraphic, reminiscent of Brenda's formal HOA letters. These were small, almost petty annoyances, designed to be irritating rather than overtly harmful. They created a sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, without providing any concrete evidence of foul play. The Millers discussed them, trying to rationalize them as coincidences, but a growing suspicion began to settle in their minds. It felt like a subtle campaign of psychological warfare. One evening, as David was settling down to watch a baseball game, his internet connection inexplicably slowed to a crawl, then completely dropped. He tried restarting the router, calling his internet provider, but nothing worked. The technician, when he finally arrived the next morning, found nothing overtly wrong with their home setup. "Seems like there might have been some interference with the main line down the street," the technician mumbled, shrugging. "Happens sometimes. Probably just a glitch." David accepted the explanation, but the timing felt off, coming right after a week of other minor frustrations. The extreme event that truly solidified their growing unease, and indicated Brenda's renewed, more cunning offensive, occurred shortly after David had completed a major architectural project for a new client. He was immensely proud of the design, which incorporated innovative green building techniques. The client, a well-known local developer, was equally thrilled and had publicly praised David's work, even mentioning him in an interview with the local newspaper. It was a significant professional boost for David, a moment of well-deserved recognition. A few days later, David received a very official-looking envelope, not from the HOA, but from the city's zoning and planning department. His heart sank as he read the contents. It was a formal notice of an anonymous complaint regarding a potential violation of residential property line regulations and building setbacks at his own home, 14 Elmwood Lane. The complaint alleged that a portion of his newly installed, small backyard shed, which he used for gardening tools, might be encroaching on the required setback from the property line. It requested a full survey of his property and compliance within 30 days, threatening substantial fines and forced removal of the shed if not rectified. David was dumbfounded. He had meticulously planned the shed's placement, ensuring it was well within all local zoning laws and HOA guidelines. He had even checked with the HOA when he put it up, and they had confirmed it was fine. This wasn't an HOA matter, but a city matter, implying a much more serious level of accusation. And the shed had been there for months without a single issue. The timing, right after his professional triumph, felt maliciously deliberate. He called Linda, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "Honey, you won't believe this. The city just sent a notice about the shed. Someone filed an anonymous complaint saying it's violating zoning laws." Linda's voice was strained. "The shed? But it's so far back. Who would do that?" David slammed the letter down on his desk. "Who else, Linda? Who else has a vendetta against us? Who else has the time and the inclination to dig into city zoning maps and file anonymous complaints just to cause trouble?" His mind raced, connecting the dots of the recent coincidences. The high water bill, the pest control flyer, the hum in Linda's studio, the internet outage, and now this targeted, official complaint aimed directly at their property. It wasn't random, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign. He felt a cold fury building inside him. This wasn't about rules or community standards anymore. This was personal. This was someone, almost certainly Brenda, trying to systematically make their lives miserable, pushing them to the brink. It was harassment, pure and simple. The sense of peace they had sought in Harmony Creek was rapidly eroding, replaced by a suffocating feeling of being targeted and constantly under siege. David knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was far more serious than a red door or a garden gnome. This was an all-out assault, and he felt a desperate need to protect his family and their new home from this unseen, persistent enemy. The question was, how do you fight an enemy who uses the very system they claim to uphold as a weapon? David's anger simmered, a hot, uncomfortable feeling that settled deep in his chest. He paced the living room, the city notice clutched in his hand like a crumpled accusation. Linda sat on the sofa, her face pale, the vibrant energy that usually surrounded her subdued by worry. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It felt like a deliberate attack on their peace of mind, their right to simply exist in their own home. The quiet life they had dreamed of in Harmony Creek was quickly turning into a nightmare of constant vigilance. "This is insane," David muttered, running a hand through his hair. "A city complaint about the shed? It's been there for months. Someone went out of their way to dig up old zoning laws and file this. And anonymous? Please. We know exactly who this is." Linda nodded slowly. "Brenda. It has to be. She's escalated this from petty HOA squabbles to something truly malicious. She's trying to wear us down, make us give up and leave." The thought of leaving, of being driven out of their new home, was like a punch to the gut. They had invested so much hope, so much effort, into building a life here. Giving up wasn't an option, but fighting Brenda felt like battling a shadow. She operated through anonymous complaints and subtle manipulations, never directly confronting them after Sarah's firm warning. David spent the next few days in a whirl of frustration and paperwork. He called the city's zoning department, trying to get more information, but they were unhelpful, merely reiterating the need for a survey and compliance. He researched local land survey companies, realizing this would be a significant expense, all to prove something he already knew was true: their shed was legally placed. The injustice of it burned. During his research, he stumbled upon online forums for homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. The stories were horrifying. Years-long legal battles, crippling fines, and neighbors driven to despair. He read about power-hungry HOA presidents who used their positions to control every aspect of residents' lives, just like Brenda. It made him feel less alone, but also more anxious about the potential long road ahead. He and Linda decided to call Sarah. They explained the latest development, the city notice about the shed, and the mounting pressure from Brenda's subtle, yet relentless, harassment. Sarah listened patiently, her voice calm and reassuring through the phone. "This is exactly what I thought she'd do," Sarah said, her tone level. "She's not going to confront you directly anymore. She'll use the system, try to make it look legitimate, but it's still harassment. It's designed to overwhelm you with bureaucracy and expense." "But what do we do, honey?" Linda asked, her voice laced with worry. "We can't keep fighting every little thing she throws at us. It's exhausting." "You don't have to," Sarah replied. "Let me handle this. Send me copies of all the letters, everything you have. And don't worry about the survey just yet. Let me look into a few things first." Her confidence was a balm to their frayed nerves. They trusted Sarah implicitly, knowing she had a knack for solving difficult problems. They sent her everything they had, the past HOA letters, the city notice, even copies of their original property survey. Sarah assured them she would be down that weekend to help them sort through it all. When Sarah arrived, she wasn't alone. She brought a colleague with her, a tall, serious-looking man named Agent Miller, who introduced himself with a firm handshake and a polite, almost formal, demeanor. He carried a sleek, black briefcase that looked very official. David and Linda exchanged puzzled glances, but said nothing. Sarah just smiled, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Agent Miller is helping me with a few technical aspects of this case," she explained vaguely. They spent the entire Saturday poring over documents at the kitchen table. Sarah and Agent Miller asked detailed questions about every interaction with Brenda, every letter, every perceived coincidence. They analyzed the city notice about the shed, cross-referencing it with zoning maps and their own property survey. Agent Miller took meticulous notes, his expression unreadable. "This anonymous complaint is interesting," Agent Miller mused, tapping a finger on the city notice. "It requires a significant amount of detailed information about your property and zoning laws. Not something an average disgruntled neighbor would easily come up with. It suggests someone with access to specific municipal data, or at least a very determined individual." "That sounds like Brenda," David grumbled. "She's like a walking encyclopedia of obscure regulations." Sarah nodded. "Precisely. This isn't random. This is targeted, and it's designed to create maximum inconvenience and distress without leaving a direct trail back to her. It's a classic harassment tactic, just dressed up in official paperwork." As they worked, Sarah gave her parents advice on how to handle any future communications from Brenda or official channels. "Do not engage with her directly if she tries to confront you again," Sarah instructed. "Record everything. Every phone call, every interaction, every letter. Keep a detailed log of dates, times, and what was said. And don't sign anything without showing it to me first." She explained that documentation was key in building a case, should it come to that. The extreme event occurred the very next day, Sunday afternoon. Sarah and Agent Miller were still at the house, having just finished organizing all the documentation and discussing their next steps. They were sitting on the porch, enjoying the quiet, when a loud, aggressive knocking pounded on their front door. It wasn't the polite rap of a friendly neighbor, it was sharp, insistent, and clearly meant to intimidate. David opened the door, his heart sinking as he saw not just Brenda, but two other men standing with her. One was a burly, stern-looking man wearing a uniform that read, Community Security Patrol, a group David had never seen or heard of in Harmony Creek. The other was a smarmy-looking man in a cheap suit, carrying a tablet. "Mr. Miller," Brenda announced, her voice dripping with triumphant malice, "I warned you about the red door. And frankly, your continued defiance is unacceptable." But this, she gestured wildly at the side of their house, where a small, almost invisible, streak of dirt from recent gardening had accumulated on the siding. "This is the last straw." David frowned. "What are you talking about, Brenda? That's just a little dirt. I was going to wash it off tomorrow." "Dirt?" Brenda scoffed. "This is a gross dereliction of your property maintenance responsibilities. It's a blatant disregard for our community's pristine appearance. And I've brought the Community Security Patrol with me because frankly, your family has proven uncooperative. Mr. Henderson here will be issuing a formal citation and a substantial fine." The burly security guard stepped forward, his face grim, and began to pull a pad from his pocket. The man in the suit, meanwhile, started typing furiously on his tablet. "And this," Brenda continued, turning to the man with the tablet, "is Mr. Jenkins, from Harmony Solutions Property Assessment. He's here to conduct an immediate, unscheduled assessment of your entire property, including the interior, to ensure full compliance with all community standards, given your persistent history of violations." Her eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "We have reason to believe there may be other issues that require immediate attention. We need to ensure that your property does not detract from the collective value of Harmony Creek." David's jaw dropped. "An interior assessment? You can't be serious. You have no right to enter our home without our permission. And a community security patrol? We've never seen them before." Brenda smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Oh, but we do, Mr. Miller. Section 10, subsection 5, paragraph D of the bylaws, which you signed, states that the HOA reserves the right to conduct unscheduled property inspections if there is a reasonable suspicion of ongoing violations affecting community harmony. And frankly, your red door, your shed, your gnome, and now your unkempt siding provide more than enough reasonable suspicion. If you refuse entry, you will face an immediate, escalating fine, and we will pursue legal action for noncompliance." Her voice was chillingly confident, as if she had all the power in the world. Linda stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists, her voice shaking with disbelief and anger. "You are not coming into our home, Brenda. This is harassment. This is an invasion of privacy." Brenda just crossed her arms, her smug smile widening. "As HOA president, I am merely upholding the covenants, Mrs. Miller. Unless you want to accrue massive fines and face serious legal consequences, I suggest you step aside. We are here to ensure the integrity of Harmony Creek." It was a moment of true terror and profound injustice. David and Linda felt trapped, cornered in their own home. They looked at Brenda, then at the two intimidating men beside her, and the sudden, awful realization hit them: Brenda wasn't just sending letters anymore. She had brought a small army to their doorstep, attempting a full-scale, legally questionable invasion of their privacy, all under the guise of HOA rules. This was her final, most aggressive move yet, designed to break them. But then, Sarah stepped out from behind her parents, her face calm, almost serene, despite the chaos unfolding. She looked at Brenda, then at the Community Security Patrol officer, and finally at Mr. Jenkins with his tablet. A slow, knowing smile touched her lips, a smile that promised something entirely unexpected. Sarah's quiet smile, a stark contrast to the palpable tension, seemed to deflate Brenda's smug confidence ever so slightly. The HOA president, however, quickly recovered, mistaking Sarah's calm for youthful naivete. "Oh, is the problem solver here to offer more vague threats?" Brenda sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is a serious matter, young lady. We are upholding community standards. Perhaps you should step aside and let us conduct our business." Sarah didn't move. Instead, she took another step forward, placing herself squarely between her parents and the unwelcome trio. Agent Miller, who had been observing silently from behind Sarah, now moved to stand beside her, his posture equally calm but radiating a quiet authority that even Brenda seemed to register. "Brenda," Sarah began, her voice clear and steady, "you mentioned reasonable suspicion of ongoing violations. You also mentioned community standards. And you are attempting an immediate, unscheduled assessment, including the interior of our private home. Is that correct?" Brenda puffed out her chest. "Absolutely. It's all in the bylaws, which they signed." She gestured at David and Linda. Section 10, subsection 5, paragraph D. "Very good," Sarah replied, a glint in her eye. "You seem to know your bylaws. But do you know the law, Brenda? Actual law, not just your interpretation of HOA rules?" Brenda scoffed. "Of course, I do. I consult with our HOA attorney constantly. This is all perfectly legal." "Really?" Sarah's smile widened, a genuinely amused expression now. "Because attempting to force entry into a private residence without a warrant, or without express, informed consent, under the guise of an HOA bylaw, is a direct violation of privacy laws and potentially constitutes trespass. Furthermore, parading around a community security patrol, that isn't a registered law enforcement agency, and attempting to fine residents for non-existent violations, like a speck of dirt, sounds suspiciously like harassment and potentially extortion. Especially when coupled with a history of anonymous complaints filed with city departments based on unsubstantiated claims." Brenda's face went from smug to a rather alarming shade of puce. She stammered, This is nonsense. I have every right as HOA president." "Your rights as HOA president end where the law begins, Brenda," Sarah stated, her voice losing its softness, now crisp and authoritative. "And harassing citizens, misrepresenting authority, and attempting to invade their private property without due process are very serious matters. Matters that, incidentally, fall under the jurisdiction of federal law enforcement, particularly when they involve a pattern of systemic harassment and abuse of power targeting individuals." At the mention of federal law enforcement, the burly security guard, Mr. Henderson, suddenly looked very uncomfortable. The man with the tablet, Mr. Jenkins, stopped typing mid-sentence, his eyes darting nervously between Sarah and Brenda. Sarah then turned her gaze directly to the Community Security Patrol officer. "Mr. Henderson, is Harmony Creek Community Security Patrol a registered, sworn law enforcement agency? Do you have the legal authority to issue citations or enforce laws beyond those of a private security firm? Are you aware of the legal ramifications of misrepresenting your authority and attempting to intimidate residents in this manner?" Mr. Henderson swallowed hard, his bravado visibly deflating. "Well, we're just here to assist the HOA, ma'am. We're a private company." "Precisely," Sarah affirmed. "Which means you have no legal authority to issue fines or compel entry into private homes. And your participation in such an action could be considered aiding and abetting harassment. You might want to consider the implications for your company's reputation and your own legal standing." She then turned to Mr. Jenkins, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the porch floorboards. "And you, Mr. Jenkins. Harmony Solutions Property Assessment. Are you aware that conducting a forced, unscheduled interior assessment without a proper court order, especially under false pretenses, can lead to charges of unlawful entry and invasion of privacy? Are you aware of the potential for a civil lawsuit against your company for participating in such a scheme?" Mr. Jenkins stammered, "I'm just following instructions, ma'am. Brenda said it was all by the book." "Brenda's book seems to be missing a few crucial chapters on federal law," Sarah said dryly. She then looked directly at Brenda, her eyes holding a powerful, unwavering gaze. "Brenda, let me be very clear. My parents are good, kind people who simply want to live peacefully in their home. Your campaign of harassment, from the petty complaints to the serious city complaint about the shed, and now this attempted invasion of their privacy, has crossed a very significant line. You are abusing your position and breaking the law. Brenda, completely flustered, tried to regain control. This is absurd. You have no authority here. Who are you, anyway? Some pushy city lawyer? Sarah's expression became utterly serious, all traces of amusement vanishing. She reached into the pocket of her shorts, not for a weapon, but for a small, dark leather wallet. With a smooth, practiced motion, she flipped it open, revealing a gleaming gold badge nestled beside an official-looking identification card. The badge caught the sunlight for a brief, blinding moment, reflecting the words emblazoned across its surface. "My name is Sarah Miller," she said, her voice now calm, steady, and filled with an undeniable, profound authority that silenced everyone present. "And I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that steals the air from your lungs, that stops time in its tracks. Brenda's jaw dropped, her eyes fixating on the badge, then slowly traveling up to Sarah's face, now devoid of any trace of mirth, replaced by a steely resolve. Mr. Henderson, the security guard, looked like he had seen a ghost, his face paling to an ashen white. Mr. Jenkins actually whimpered, clutching his tablet to his chest. Brenda, usually so composed in her self-appointed authority, looked utterly shattered. Her carefully constructed world of petty rules and unchallenged power crumbled around her. The red door, which had been the focus of her ire moments before, now seemed like an irrelevant detail in the face of the monumental mistake she had just made. She had tried to intimidate a quiet, unassuming young woman and, in doing so, had stumbled into a situation far beyond her comprehension. She stared at Sarah, utterly speechless, the realization of her catastrophic error finally dawning on her. The next few days were a blur of activity for the Millers, but a very different kind of activity than before. Sarah, now fully in charge of the situation, handled everything with a quiet efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and slightly intimidating, even for her parents. Agent Miller, her colleague, remained a silent, watchful presence, providing support and an air of unwavering professionalism. David and Linda watched as Sarah made phone calls, her voice calm and authoritative, speaking in a language full of acronyms and legal terms they didn't quite understand. She contacted the city's zoning and planning department, not with a defensive plea, but with a firm inquiry into the origin and validity of the anonymous complaint against their shed, hinting at potential federal implications for malicious filings. She also made calls to the Community Security Patrol Company and Harmony Solutions Property Assessment, not with threats, but with pointed questions about their operating licenses, their training, and their understanding of privacy laws when operating on behalf of private entities like HOAs. The companies, clearly shaken by the mention of the FBI, immediately backpedaled, offering profuse apologies and assurances that they would cooperate fully with any inquiries. Brenda, meanwhile, seemed to have vanished. She was no longer seen on her daily walks, no longer spotted with her clipboard. Her blinds remained drawn, and her car stayed in her garage. The silence from her was almost as unnerving as her previous aggressions, but infinitely more welcome. The anonymous complaint about their shed with the city was swiftly withdrawn, and David received an official apology from the zoning department, citing an administrative error. The security company and the assessment firm sent formal letters of apology to the Millers, promising to review their policies and conduct a thorough internal investigation into the incident. The fines Brenda had attempted to levy were, of course, nullified. Sarah explained to her parents that while she couldn't use her FBI status for personal matters directly, Brenda's actions had crossed into areas where federal agencies do have jurisdiction. Harassment, abuse of power, misrepresentation, and attempting to coerce individuals under false pretenses, these aren't just HOA violations, Mom and Dad, Sarah clarified. When a pattern of such behavior impacts interstate commerce, or involves federal mail fraud for official notices, or crosses state lines, or even significantly disrupts the peace of mind of citizens, it can become a federal matter. And Brenda's actions were certainly approaching that threshold. She didn't reveal if she had formally opened a case, but the mere revelation of her true identity, and the implicit threat of federal oversight, had been enough to send shivers down Brenda's spine and halt her campaign in its tracks. It was a potent reminder that while kindness and empathy were powerful, sometimes a very firm hand, backed by the full weight of the law, was necessary to protect those values. The less extreme event that followed was a quiet but profound shift in Harmony Creek. Word, as it always does in small communities, traveled fast. Neighbors who had previously been wary of Brenda, or who had secretly suffered under her rigid rules, began to cautiously approach David and Linda. They expressed their relief, their quiet admiration, and even shared their own stories of Brenda's overbearing tactics. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, tearfully thanked them for standing up to Brenda, confessing that she had been too afraid to voice her own concerns about the HOA's excessive rules. There was a subtle but noticeable change in the neighborhood's atmosphere. Lawns seemed a little less perfectly manicured, a few more colorful flowers appeared in flowerbeds, and a general air of relaxed normalcy began to replace the previous tension. The other HOA board members, perhaps sensing a shift in the power dynamic, or simply wanting to distance themselves from Brenda's recent debacle, began to be more approachable and reasonable. They even initiated a community meeting to review some of the more restrictive bylaws, suggesting a move towards more resident-friendly policies. It seemed Sarah's intervention had, inadvertently, sparked a quiet revolution. However, the extreme event that then occurred, though less direct than Brenda's previous confrontations, indicated that her malice still lingered, and that her reach, though diminished, was not entirely gone. It happened late one Tuesday night, long after David and Linda had gone to bed. A strange smell woke David, a faint, acrid odor that wasn't quite smoke, but definitely alarming. He got up, his heart pounding, and checked the house. Everything seemed fine. He then went to the kitchen and looked out the back window. The faint glow of a streetlight illuminated their backyard. His breath hitched in his throat. His prized herb garden, which he had meticulously cultivated, was gone. Not just wilted, but completely, systematically destroyed. The soil was churned, the small, tender plants ripped out by their roots, leaving only a desolate patch of disturbed earth. It wasn't vandalism in the usual sense, there was no spray paint, no broken pots. It was a targeted, silent act of pure malice, designed to destroy something deeply personal to him. And nestled among the disturbed soil, glinting faintly in the weak light, was a single, tiny, perfectly formed garden gnome. Not Norman, who was safe in the backyard studio, but a cheap, plastic imitation, its painted smile mocking him from the ruined garden. It was a chilling message, a silent, cruel reminder that even in her absence, Brenda's shadow still loomed over Harmony Creek. David stared at the ruined garden, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The small, cheap gnome, placed deliberately amidst the uprooted herbs, felt like a silent, taunting laugh from Brenda. It wasn't just the destruction of his beloved plants, it was the personal nature of the attack, a direct strike at something he had poured his heart into. Linda, awakened by his distressed cry, came out and gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she saw the devastation. "My herbs!" David whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "She destroyed them. And look, another gnome." Linda picked up the plastic figure, her face a mask of sorrow and anger. "This is beyond cruel, David. This is malicious. She's trying to break us down piece by piece." The immediate aftermath was filled with a sense of violation. They felt exposed, vulnerable in their own home. Despite Sarah's intervention, Brenda had managed to strike a blow, proving that her reach, though subtle, was still terrifyingly effective. They called Sarah immediately, even though it was the middle of the night. Her voice, though groggy, sharpened instantly as they described the ruined garden and the mocking gnome. "She's escalating again," Sarah said, her voice grim. "This is no longer just harassment, this is criminal mischief, plain and simple. And the repeated use of the gnome is a form of symbolic intimidation. Don't touch anything else in the garden, Dad. I'll be there first thing in the morning." True to her word, Sarah arrived at dawn, not alone. This time, she brought a forensics specialist, a quiet woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, who meticulously examined the scene. Dr. Reed wore gloves and used specialized tools, taking samples of soil, tiny fibers, and even photographing microscopic footprints. David and Linda watched in stunned silence as their tranquil garden became a crime scene. "We might not get direct fingerprints on the gnome," Dr. Reed explained calmly, "but we'll be looking for anything that points to a specific individual. We're also checking for any traces of accelerants or other chemicals that might have been used to damage the plants, or anything left behind by the perpetrator." Sarah reassured her parents. "This isn't just about your garden, Mom and Dad. This is about establishing a pattern of criminal behavior. When you combine this with the attempted forced entry, the anonymous complaints, and the general campaign of harassment, it paints a very clear picture." The investigation provided a much-needed sense of purpose amidst their despair. Knowing that Sarah and her team were methodically collecting evidence, building a case, helped them feel less helpless. They still felt the sting of the violation, but now it was tempered with a growing resolve. They would not be driven out. The less extreme event that followed was a surprising, and rather heartwarming, display of community solidarity. Word of the ruined garden, despite the Millers' attempts to keep it quiet, spread through Harmony Creek. Perhaps it was Mrs. Henderson, or another neighbor who had witnessed Brenda's previous antics, who let it slip. Regardless, the response was overwhelming. One sunny afternoon, David and Linda looked out their window to see a steady stream of neighbors approaching their house, not with complaints, but with gardening tools, bags of soil, and trays of vibrant new plants. Mrs. Henderson brought a small flat of bright red petunias, a silent act of rebellion against the HOA rules. A young family from down the street brought bags of nutrient-rich soil and sturdy gardening gloves. Another neighbor, a quiet man who usually kept to himself, arrived with a beautiful, fully grown rosemary bush, a symbol of remembrance and resilience. "We heard what happened," Mrs. Henderson said softly, her eyes filled with sympathy as she saw the bare patch of earth. "It's awful. But we want you to know, you're not alone. Brenda doesn't speak for all of us." Soon, their yard was filled with the gentle hum of activity. Neighbors, many of whom they had only known superficially, worked side by side, digging, planting, and mulching. Children helped carry small bags, their faces serious. The air was filled with quiet conversations, shared smiles, and the scent of fresh earth. It was a powerful, unspoken message of kindness and empathy, a clear rebuttal to Brenda's malice. The community, far from being divided by Brenda's actions, was coming together, showing their true colors. David watched, tears welling in his eyes. This was the Harmony Creek they had dreamed of, a place where people cared for one another, where genuine community spirit blossomed despite the rigid rules imposed by one individual. Linda, equally moved among the neighbors, offering iced tea and heartfelt thanks. The ruined garden was being transformed, not just into a new patch of herbs, but into a living testament to resilience and the power of collective good. They realized that while Brenda could cause harm, she could not destroy the fundamental human desire for connection and support. This act of collective kindness was a profound antidote to the lingering bitterness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their now flourishing garden, the neighbors began to depart, leaving behind a garden reborn, brimming with new life and a visible symbol of their collective empathy. David and Linda walked through it, touching the fresh leaves, feeling the soft soil, their hearts full. It was a beautiful, restorative moment. But the peace was short-lived. The extreme event that followed came not from Brenda directly, but through a chilling reminder of her far-reaching influence, and her desperation to regain control. It occurred late that night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet. David and Linda were asleep, tired but content from the day's unexpected warmth. Suddenly, a loud, piercing alarm blared through the house. It wasn't their smoke alarm, but something far more jarring and unfamiliar. David jolted upright, his heart leaping into his throat. He looked at the digital clock, 2:17 a.m. He scrambled out of bed, adrenaline coursing through him. Linda was already up, her eyes wide with fear. The alarm was coming from Linda's pottery studio in the garage. It was a high-pitched, insistent shriek, accompanied by a flickering red light visible from under the garage door. David rushed downstairs, Linda close behind him. He fumbled with the garage door opener, his hands shaking. As the door slowly rumbled open, revealing the interior of the studio, the sight that greeted them was terrifying. The studio was filled with a thick, acrid smoke, stinging their eyes and catching in their throats. The source was unmistakable. Linda's beloved electric kiln, which she had used safely for years, was glowing with an unnatural, intense red heat. Flames, small but growing, licked out from around its base, and a dangerous electrical smell hung heavy in the air. The studio's fire extinguisher was on the floor, its pin removed and its nozzle pointed away, as if it had been deliberately disabled. A faint, almost imperceptible clicking sound came from the corner of the studio, near the main electrical panel, a small, electronic device, blinking silently, a device that had clearly not been there before. Someone had not only broken into the studio but had deliberately sabotaged the kiln, attempting to start a fire. This wasn't just criminal mischief, this was an act of arson, a direct threat to their home and their lives. David reacted instantly, his mind cutting through the fear with the sharp edge of survival. "Linda, get out. Call 911, he yelled, even as he instinctively grabbed the studio's main circuit breaker, yanking it down with a desperate heave. The alarming shriek of the sabotaged kiln's alarm died, and the flickering red glow began to dim, but the acrid smoke continued to pour from the unit. The small flames around its base, however, flickered and died. Linda, her face pale with terror, fumbled for her phone as she backed out of the garage. David grabbed a heavy fire blanket from the wall and smothered the smoking kiln, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The electronic device he'd noticed earlier was now silent, blinking innocuously in the corner, its purpose chillingly clear. Someone had deliberately tampered with the kiln, bypassing its safety features, and had meant to burn their house down. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder as fire trucks and police cruisers converged on Harmony Creek. David and Linda stood on their lawn, shivering, watching as firefighters, their faces grim, confirmed the attempted arson. The police secured the scene, and within what felt like mere moments, Sarah and Agent Miller were there, their expressions serious as they surveyed the damage. They bypassed the thermal cutoff switch and likely overloaded the circuit, the lead firefighter explained to Sarah, pointing to the kiln. It was designed to fail in a catastrophic way. And that little device over there, he indicated the blinking electronics, looks like a remote trigger, or at least a timer. Someone meant for this to go off when you were asleep. Sarah's jaw tightened. Understood. Thank you. This is now a federal matter. Her voice held an unwavering authority that left no room for doubt. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Investigators from various agencies descended upon their home. David and Linda recounted everything, from Brenda's initial microaggressions to the ruined garden and now this terrifying act. They handed over all the documentation Sarah had told them to keep, the letters, the logs, the complaints. Evelyn Reed returned, her forensic kit expanded, meticulously collecting every piece of evidence from the sabotaged kiln and the strange electronic device. Brenda's absence was now deafening. Her house remained dark and silent, her car still parked in the garage. The police had already attempted to question her, but she wasn't answering her door. It was clear she was hiding, the severity of her actions finally catching up to her. The less extreme event that followed was the quiet, almost surreal aftermath of the fire. The smell of smoke lingered in the air for days, a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Their once peaceful home now felt like a central hub for official vehicles. The kiln was taken away for further analysis. Neighbors, concerned and shocked by the news of the attempted arson, brought over food and offered comfort, their collective empathy a warm blanket against the lingering chill of fear. The incident solidified the community's quiet rebellion against Brenda's tyrannical rule. The HOA board, meeting in an emergency session, quickly voted to strip Brenda of all her powers and initiated a formal investigation into her conduct, pledging to work towards a more transparent and fair leadership. This time, David and Linda weren't just worried, they were angry, a cold, steady fury that replaced their fear. This wasn't just about a garden or a door. This was an attempt on their lives, a malicious act that crossed every line. They fully cooperated with Sarah and her team, eager for justice. The extreme event, the wild ending that brought everything to a head, came swiftly and dramatically. Sarah and Agent Miller, working tirelessly behind the scenes, had gathered enough evidence. The forensic analysis of the electronic device found in the studio yielded surprising results. It was a specialized timer, typically used in industrial settings, modified for remote activation. More damning, tiny traces of a rare, specialized lubricant found on the device matched samples taken from tools Brenda used in her own meticulously maintained garage, tools she had boasted about at a past HOA meeting. Combined with the pattern of harassment, the anonymous complaints, and the eyewitness accounts of Brenda's behavior, the case against her was airtight. Armed with a federal warrant, Sarah, accompanied by Agent Miller and several uniformed federal agents, descended upon Brenda's house in broad daylight. The quiet of Harmony Creek was shattered once more, but this time, it was for justice. Neighbors emerged from their homes, watching in stunned silence as the drama unfolded. Brenda, finally answering her door after repeated knocks, was met by Sarah's unwavering gaze. Her face, usually so composed, was now pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate defiance. "Brenda Mae Higgins," Sarah stated, her voice resonating with official authority, "I am Special Agent Sarah Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of attempted arson, aggravated harassment, and abuse of power. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Brenda visibly crumpled, her previous bluster completely gone. She looked around frantically, as if searching for an escape, for some final rule to hide behind. But there was nowhere to go, no bylaw that could save her from federal charges. The sight of Agent Miller, his expression unreadable, and the other stern-faced agents flanking Sarah, solidified the terrifying reality of her situation. She had crossed the line, not just with her neighbors, but with the law. As the agents calmly escorted a shell-shocked Brenda to a waiting unmarked vehicle, she caught sight of David and Linda standing on their porch, watching. Their faces were no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet dignity and a profound sense of relief. Brenda, for the first time, saw the full weight of her actions reflected in their eyes, and she looked away, defeated. The car pulled away, taking Brenda and her reign of terror out of Harmony Creek forever. The neighbors slowly dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, a collective sigh of relief sweeping through the community. The red door on the Miller's house, once a symbol of defiance, now stood as a vibrant testament to resilience, kindness, and the powerful truth that even in the face of overwhelming malice, justice, sometimes, arrives with a quiet strength and a federal badge. Harmony Creek, finally free from Brenda's grip, could now truly begin to heal, its harmony restored not by strict rules, but by the genuine spirit of its people.